Welcome to BANTR Radio. I'm your host, Will Sherwin. I record conversations with people involved with narrative therapy and make them freely available on the internet. When I was at UC Davis as an undergraduate, I was a college radio DJ. It was one of my favorite things to do would be to play other people's music and curate other people's music and put them together in interesting ways. And how do I frame this so that it builds, and all these skills that go into college radio DJing. And so I think of it in a similar way of playing other people's songs, mixing things together. And I thought I would talk about some of the histories involved with that project. When I was 22, I was burning out at a job at a group home in Oakland. And I left to go to a Zen Buddhist monastery in Big Sur, California for 2 years. And what was most precious about that time for me, what remains most precious, isn't so much the philosophy or the mindfulness even, it's the vow to live for the benefit of all beings. And not just the beings that I meet, but all the beings I'll never meet who aren't born yet. I'm taking on that vow. And that's what I want to put at the center of my life till I'm dead. And I didn't encounter narrative therapy in graduate school. It wasn't until I was taking the marriage and family therapist licensing exam. There was 5 pages, and I thought, these are good questions. These are interesting principles. I could apply these to the work I'm doing. This is better than what I was doing before. And I felt there was so much potential for narrative therapy to be a support towards that vow that I'd taken. And I was at a party, and I ran into Elijah Nella, who also had just been inspired by narrative therapy. We decided we would meet in a cafe for 2 hours. We ended up doing it every week for 2 hours for 6 months, reading articles, getting to know each other, and putting these ideas into practice in our work lives and our personal lives. We bring quotes like Kenneth Gergen saying, "Therapy tends to privilege the individual rather than the set of relationships in which the individual lives." What happens if we start looking at the set of relationships in which we live instead of focusing on ourselves as individuals? And we would try it for a week and come back and talk about what we saw that was different, what we could see in our work that was different, how our own lives felt differently. And I said, there's so much potential in this, to live with this vow and to benefit others. And I think back to those 6 months of conversations I had with Elijah, and I thought, God, I wish I had someone who was recorded. Because I could talk about the person is not the problem is the problem, but that's already my worldview. At the time, it was this transformative thing we weren't quite sure about. We were trying it out. Maybe there's some dangers in this approach. Maybe we should think of people as problems. I don't know. Let's try it out for a little while and see if we prefer it that way. And there was so much energy in our voice. You would have heard it. You would have been on the edge of your seat wondering, when they come back in a week, what would have happened? What did they see? What stories came from that? But we can't. I know if we recorded it, it would have changed the conversation. But I also think if we had recorded that conversation, I think other people would have benefited from that too. Other beginners in narrative therapy had those questions and those doubts and that skepticism about just blindly accepting principles would have been interested in that conversation. There's questions that beginners ask that there's a spirit to them that I really liked. Beginner's mind, maybe. Mm-hmm. So I went to a workshop with David Epstein, and he talked about intention of restoring honor and dignity with young people and their families, and I thought this is the first time anyone's ever talked about dignity in a mental health training. It's true. We talk about self-esteem and healthiness, just to promote that, but not about dignity, and that opened up a kind of a new dimension. And it wasn't just Elijah. No, it wasn't just David Epstein. It was others in the community that were opening up new dimensions. Around the same time, so I started getting involved in narrative therapy in 2010. There's this world of podcasts, and some of them are professionally produced, like This American Life. We'd also start finding podcasts that sounded like some person who was passionate about a subject, recording people and putting it up for free online. There was one called Harm Reduction Radio by a guy named Kenneth Anderson, who was homeless in his car, addicted to what he says alcohol and television, and going to 12-step programs, and 12-step didn't particularly work for him. when he found harm reduction, he was able to move forward with his life. And so he decided to make a podcast. And he would interview relational psychoanalysts, behaviorists, narrative therapists, and ask questions that he was very interested in asking. This medium has potential too. And I'm fascinated by the potential of this medium of people who are passionate about things, recording conversations with people they're interested in. And I thought, well, I could write Dulwich Center and ask them to make a podcast, but they're probably busy with lots of other projects. And is it presumptuous of me to start something? Well, I wouldn't be teaching what is narrative therapy. I wouldn't be trying to do that and pontificate about my ideas. I don't know if I could do that very well. But I could ask questions that I'm genuinely interested in, with people I'm genuinely interested in talking to, and share those with others. I see a lot of people having good conversations. I kind of want to eavesdrop on all of them all at once. And so I think of the podcast I'm doing, which I call BANTR Radio, as me tinkering with some of these potentials I see with narrative therapy, with this medium of podcasting. I thought, well, what I could do is I could write down some of these quotes that have been so precious and transformative and de-psychologizing of myself and the people I work with, and bring them to an elder, who was Julia Wallace, who's kind of a mentor figure to me in San Francisco, and we could discuss them. So I wasn't just putting on her spot and saying, what is narrative therapy? And it's a hard question to answer, but I would give her something to kind of be evocative ideas for her. And I thought that went well, so I kept doing it. And I've done 10 episodes. It's been about 3 years. I do it when I feel like it. When I enjoy it, when I'm inspired. If my daydreaming starts to have a certain heft, when I daydream about imaginary conversations with someone, sometimes I'll invite them. And so I like interviewing elders. I also have a penchant for quirky projects. Last one I did was I picked songs that I thought were evocative of narrative therapy, and we discussed them at the LA Pomo Gathering. Larry Zucker, Charlie Zhang, and others were there. And it feels like it's me tinkering and sharing conversations. But also, if other people out there are interested in recording conversations with people whose voice they want to uplift and put on this strange cyberdelic world of the internet and see what happens, I could consult with you. I'm not too busy for that kind of thing. If you'd like to record elders, or you have your own quirky projects, it might be useful to record somebody. There's weird technical difficulties that get in the way of that vision. Find me out, and I could talk to you about some of these skills. And when we were at the training with Tom Carlson and David, Tom was interviewing someone. He talked about how maybe her loving others was a way of learning to love herself. And I wonder, for me personally, if lifting up other voices has also been a way of lifting up my own voice. Mm-hmm. And I found that in this project, my voice is also being lifted, although I think about it in terms of lifting other people's voices. So if there's people out there who also are in this process of lifting your voice, and it's important to you, and you think it might be useful to the broader community, there's a lot of advice about, work harder at it, be courageous and stuff, but also you could do a project of lifting up other voices. I found that to be helpful. Chris Hoff and the Radical Therapist, he has done tremendous work interviewing many people and broader than I do. So I focus mostly on narrative therapy, and he goes into talking with, a dialogue with emotional focus therapy and cybernetics and other social justice approaches. And so I think he's doing wonderful work, and it's a wonderful podcast.
I heard you say you make it when you want to make it, but I have to say I get antsy, like I'm hoping that
When's your next album out, man?
I'm not trying to pressure you, but I'm just saying,
I feel the same way.
I'll check and I'll check the website and I'll be like, oh, shit, there's not like if you have a commute or something, it makes your commute disappear, so I'm driving, I'm just listening, and the way that Will does it too, I almost feel like it's very homey, like I'm sitting next to you and the person that you're talking with. And so I just wanted to tell you what my experience was as a consumer, and it only took listening to one episode.
What's the average length?
About an hour, give or take 15 minutes.
Wow. It's a serious interview.
Yeah, and I will say, some people are kind and they say they appreciate it. My favorite compliment was somebody in San Francisco who said, I got into narrative therapy through the podcast.
Oh.
I was searching online, and like you said, you see a lot of videos that students make of narrative therapy as externalization, but I stumbled into your podcast, and I hope it conveys some of the spirit of narrative therapy through the conversations. I just want to say just my profound gratitude for this community for developing these ideas and making them accessible, because it changed my life. I got involved in this in 2010, and I kind of thought, I wish I had gotten involved in this in 2006 or earlier. And I want to make these ideas accessible, so it's free, and just make it accessible.
Did we want to hear a little piece of one of the...
Oh, we're going to hear a little
I think
piece.
that would be
Which
great.
one would you like to hear?
Why don't you just do the last one? Welcome to BANTR Radio. I'm your host, Will Sherwin. And before I started doing this podcast, I did some searching online for freely available audio and podcasts involving narrative therapists. And I found some stuff that I really enjoyed and learned from. So I wanted to share with you on this episode some excerpts from the audio files that I discovered. These are audio made between 2005 to 2015. And I'm thinking of this kind of like a collective audio bouquet of different voices in the narrative therapy world. Or like a sampler platter where you hear a little bit of it in these excerpts, and you can go online to sfbantr.org and find links to the full episodes if you've heard something that interests you. That's the idea. Enjoy the show. We're going to go chronologically, starting in October 2005, when Michael White was interviewed for the show All in the Mind, a podcast by Australia's Radio National.
But what is narrative therapy?
I guess it's to do with the idea that people give meaning to their experiences of life by taking them into a storyline, and to make meaning is an achievement, but it's an achievement that actually has consequences. The storylines shape our life. They have very significant ramifications for our relationships and for how we live our life.
Your practice also implies that we sometimes need help to observe our stories, that they often become skewed in perspective. So in this sense, what's a thin story?
A thin story is a story that usually features a whole range of very definite conclusions about one's life and one's identity. And these are often stories that represent, as I said, their life to be quite hopeless, and often it features conclusions about their inadequacy and incompetence. And so that's what I'm referring to when I talk about a thin story. And I'm really interested in engaging people in conversations in which they become active in giving meaning to other experiences of life that have been neglected, that are much richer and that bring with them, many, many possibilities.
And those stories are often hidden.
Well, I think they're also, I think in many ways life is multi-storied, but there are often storylines that contradict the sort of dominant storyline. I sometimes think about them as the subordinate stories of life. We can play a part in helping people to redevelop these stories of life and to elevate them, and they provide a foundation for possibility in life.